Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Kale Black, and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator for Burlington Green Environmental Association. On behalf of Burlington Green, I would like to extend our thanks and gratitude to every single one of you for joining us tonight, and of course, for our special guest, Bob Bell. Our webinar tonight is part of our Nature Friendly Burlington program, which is designed to connect more of the community to local green space, to stewardship opportunities, so different opportunities to actually get your hands dirty and involved, really actively restoring some of Burlington's ecosystems, and of course, educate and help connect people to the multitude of benefits that nature experiences provide. As some of you may know, Bob's 2022 book highlights a lot of his experiences on how birding and nature has helped him on his wellness journey. And we hope that tonight's presentation will help remind us all of the beauty in our own backyards and neighborhoods. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we are fortunate to reside on. This land acknowledgement relates to where Burlington Green's office is situated in Burlington, Ontario. And if you're joining us from somewhere else, I already saw in the chat, there's people that have joined us from all over the place. And feel free again to type your location into the chat. We love to see that. And would encourage everybody to acknowledge the land that they are tuning in from. So in Burlington, our work within the community takes place within the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And we recognize this land as being home and the traditional territory to Indigenous people since time immemorial. We honor all past and present First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people, and we recognize their leadership in protecting and caring for Mother Earth. We join them in honoring and respecting the lands, waters, plants, animals, and four directions, and all of the wonderful elements of creation that exist. Burlington Green has much to learn from Indigenous peoples, and we encourage everyone to continually learn from and about the Indigenous community where you live, and how we can each meaningfully honor the calls to action for truth and reconciliation. And one thing I like to include whenever I'm doing a land acknowledgement is this image, which is a map that we have taken from native-land.ca. And one of the reasons I just like to share this is to make it a little bit more of an active reflection of my own reflections when I'm listening to land acknowledgements. So I actually didn't see a map like this until I was about 31. So just a few years ago. And I remember just feeling a little bit startled when I had first seen this image because I had a lot of misconceptions. And I think previous to that, I had really thought that based on my limited education, that North America was not that much of a populated continent prior to colonization. And I just shared this map specifically because it gave me at 31 a moment to reflect and pause and realize that there was a lot that I did not know about the Indigenous communities and the Indigenous history here in Canada. And my personal feeling as Kale Black is just as someone who has the benefit to live, work, and play here in North America, previously called Turtle Island, that learning about the history and the 94 calls to action for truth and reconciliation is part of what I'm doing to actively reflect and make land acknowledgements just a little bit more action oriented, as well as a time to reflect. And for anybody joining in from anywhere else, you can use the native-land link right here and type in any location and it'll show you a map similar to this, which will tell you some of the Indigenous communities that historically lived in those locations. So Bob has, or we have had the pleasure of hosting Bob for a few different events, and you can see some of them laid out throughout here. And Shelby's actually going to post a link to our YouTube channel in the chat. And we are so lucky because all of these have been recorded and actually put up on our YouTube page. So thank goodness if you missed any of Bob's previous presentations, you can check them all out on our YouTube page. And normally I would share much more of an introduction, but I know from rehearsing with Bob that he starts his presentation by sharing a little bit of background information. So rather than an extensive introduction, I'm actually going to do two brief polls to get things started and to make things a little bit more interactive. So the first question I am launching here on the screen, and it's saying, for hopefully everybody can see it, The question is this your first time attending a Bob Bell and Burlington Green webinar? So you can see up on the screen, I'll give people about 45 seconds to answer, maybe sooner if we get through them all really quickly. But you can see a whole bunch of them on here and super cool. We have 80% of you guys responded so far, so maybe I'll just give another 10 seconds. But that's also helpful for us as hosts to know like who's joining us here for the first time, and also lucky big chunk of you because it appears that it is quite a few people's first event, which means you have the joy and pleasure of now enjoying Bob's previous webinars, which are on our page. So cool, you can see there, Bob, it's about 75% new faces joining us today. And I just have one more poll that I'll share before I hand the screen over to Bob. And this one's a little bit of bird trivia. And we would like to know how many people tuning in today know what the city of Burlington's official bird is. Ooh, I'll give everyone maybe 30 seconds. We have 10 more seconds. We have over half of you have responded already. You can see there's a strong trend, but we have some diversity in the answers here. And to credit that, I believe we only picked our official bird like in the past few years. What was that, Bob?
Nothing. Just very interesting.
There we go. So 54% of you guessed that it is the trumpeter swans. And you are correct. And I believe Bob has a mention of that in his presentation. So without further ado, I would like to hand the screen over to the very wonderful Bob Bell. I will stop my screen share and take it on over from here, my friend.
Okay, thank you, Cale, and welcome everyone. It's very gratifying to see such a great turnout. It really makes me feel good to know so many people are interested in birds and share my passion. So not only want to thank Cale, but Burlington Green for having been so generous. And
Bob, sorry to interrupt. I think on your screen, I still see the Zoom, a Zoom sign-in screen. I don't think it's on your presentation screen at the moment.
Okay. Hopefully if I close that, it won't.
Oh, okay. Someone else sees the slides and I could just be mistaken.
I see the slides too.
Okay, so never mind.
Yeah, there you go. All good.
Okay. It's good now. Okay, so like I was saying, not only want to thank Cale, but Burlington Green for having given me this forum to share my passion 5 times. And, I really encourage everyone to donate to Burlington Green. They're doing great conservancy work. And, there's never been a more important time to donate, given, what we've seen here in Ontario with the assaults on the green belt. And, when I look out the window and there's no snow, the end of January with climate change. So there's their website. It'll be in your handout to donate to them. So just a very quick word about me. I grew up in the Sioux in Northern Ontario. My dad was a high school science teacher and vice principal, and he is the one that really instilled in me a love and passion of all kinds of science and nature and the outdoors. So it's not surprising I ended up in a career that combined outdoors and science as an exploration geologist. And I spent 35 years working all over the world, exploring mostly for gold. This map shows some of my adventures. And when I had to retire because I contracted Lyme disease, I was serving as the CEO of a Toronto Stock Exchange listed junior mining company. And after I retired, I very quickly discovered the healing power of birds, and they're sort of a form of mindfulness. They got my mind off my aching, ailing body and my aches and pains. And I ended up writing a book about it, my journey into Lyme and my frustrations with the medical community. And then in my conversion to a birder, and I called it Out of the Limelight and Into the Sunlight, Birding as Therapy for the Chronically Ill. And locally, the stores I know that are carrying it, there may be more. Wild Birds Unlimited, different Drummer Books and King West Books. There's 8 urban nature stores spread right across the GTA that have it. Online, you can buy it from my publisher, Hancock House, or from Amazon or Indigo. And I'm quite proud to say it's at the gift stores in both Algonquin Park and Point Pelee, 2 of the best birding places in the world. And I must admit, when I see my book on the same shelves with famous authors like David Allen Sibley and Roger Tory Peterson, it's very humbling. So there's a number of different kinds of birding, and they don't all require a lot of expert knowledge or long strenuous hikes or a lot of expensive gear. I'm a big believer in just bird to your bird ability. Take out of birding whatever pleasure you derive from it and be happy with that. If you're sitting watching bird feeders, as far as I'm concerned, you're a birder. Or if you walk down to a park and sit on a bench and you're paying attention to the birds singing around you, you're birding. And if you have health issues and you can't get out, there are nest cams and feeder cams around the world. So you can literally watch birds 24/7 in the comfort of your own home. And some of these links will be in your handout and are in my book. So probably the most common type of birding is simply backyard birding. But, I realize not everyone has the luxury of having a backyard, so I want to be inclusive. What if you're in an apartment or a condo and, what's he talking about backyard? I don't have one. Well, you can go to, for example, Wild Birds Unlimited in Burlington have these window feeders where they attach with a suction cup to the feeder. And if you do have a balcony in your apartment, presumably then you don't have a squirrel problem. So you could actually put down a tray feeder with some seed just on top of a little table. And I would think some greenery, some potted plants might help in luring the birds in. But I also realize that perhaps some apartment buildings or condos are going to have rules that they don't want seeds in a mess. So I have no idea if this would work, but one suggestion I came up with is try a hummingbird feeder. I have no idea, but it's worth a shot. So tonight we're going to focus on the amazing variety of birds that visit my yard here in Ancaster. And all the photos you're going to see I took in my yard or around our little townhouse complex, most of them just sitting at my desk through my window. Gail mentioned all the questions that were submitted when you registered. I really appreciate that. Some of them I'm going to try to address as I go through the talk. I've got at the end almost like a standalone separate presentation to answer the questions that were submitted. And then following that, if time is still permitting, I'm happy to try to field any new questions that come in tonight. But everything will go out in the handouts that will be emailed to you. So, why is this area, not just my backyard, why is this area so birdy? So we're going to start with the really big picture. And I would love to say that I took it, but this came from the space station. So we're looking east, right down the axis of Lake Ontario with Ancaster here and Lake Erie here, Lake Simcoe and Georgian Bay here. So most songbirds, when they're migrating, north in the spring or south in the fall, they'll go over huge bodies of water if they have to. But if there's a way around it, they prefer not to. So my theory is that migrating birds, you see on Lake Erie, has a couple of shortcuts. Long Point here, and you can't see it, but Point Pelee is just off the photo. So those are shortcuts, and lo and behold, those 2 spots are 2 of the best birding places in the world. But you see, Lake Ontario doesn't have any similar shortcuts. So my theory is migrating birds, when they hit Lake Ontario at this end of it, say from the middle over, they'll kind of contour around and use the Niagara Peninsula as almost like a land bridge to get in between and around the lakes. So that funnels a lot of birds through our area here. And in addition, we've got the Niagara Escarpment running along the lakeshore, and thermals rising off the water provide a great lift for raptors. So a lot of migrating hawks and eagles will capitalize on that and get a free ride. So then when we zoom into the big picture rather than the really big picture, there's a Google Earth shot. You can see the Niagara Escarpment snaking through Hamilton, and it comes out here And then it makes a U-turn, which forms the Dundas Valley, and then heads on out to the northeast. So in this Dundas Valley, we end up with this primary Carolinian forest, marshes, old orchards, overgrown farmlands. So lots of different habitats, and more habitats means more birds and different types of birds. And then we're blessed with the Dundas Marsh, Coote's Paradise. We've got the shores of the Great Lakes for gulls and ducks and waterfowl. And then we've got all these great birding spots like LaSalle and Marina. I've referred to it a number of times. All the RBG properties and the Dundas Valley. So it's a great area for birding. And in my house down here, you can see I'm on the edge of some forest, which through a patchwork connects with the Dundas Valley. I'm not contiguous with it, but I semi-contiguous. And then zooming into Bob's backyard, a good friend of mine found this off on a realtor site, a drone shot. I guess they were selling a house, and happens to show our little complex called Town Manors. And my backyard is here, and this is looking west out over the Dundas Valley. So, Kale, you talk about, what's your secret to success? Well, as McDonald's used to say, the three keys are location, location, location. So, I am lucky in that regard. And in addition, it doesn't show in this photo, but off in the corner, we have a storm retention pond. And of course, ponds attract a lot of different wildlife as well. So now we're zoomed down into my backyard. It's a tiny little backyard. Here's my feeders, and I'm going to go through this in more detail when I come to the questions at the end. But some of the important things to note on this side is a central pole with shepherd's hooks. So you hang different styles of feeders because not every bird likes to eat the same way. Some like to cling, some like to knock seed to the ground, some like to be on a platform. Some like specialty food, and they don't all eat the same food. You want a baffle to keep the squirrels and raccoons from climbing up and cleaning out the feeders and your wallet. You want some surrounding shrubs or trees, and that's for security for the birds. I watch them come into my red bud here in the middle, and they come in from the far side, and then they work their nerve up and sneak in and then pop out. And likewise, if a raptor comes in, they need a refuge to dive into for security. But you don't want them so close that the squirrels can jump off onto the feeders. They need to be about 10 feet away. Very important, just as much as food, is to offer water. So I've got a water tray here, and you can see I put this out. This was before Christmas. The leaves are still in the trees, but I put a heater in it so that water's there all winter. And one of the questions was any suggestions for photography. So what I've done is my office window is just off here to the left, my home office window. And I bought this table. It's quite a high table. So looking out my window, it's almost at eye level. And I found some really nice mossy logs and I set that up. And then I put a few seeds on it. And then hopefully I get some nice shots when the birds come to that. So here's an example, a couple of dark-eyed juncos on what I call my stage. And, I prefer that over taking a picture of the bird on the feeder. It just looks more natural, even though it is staged. So, in my little backyard to date, I have seen or heard 79 species. And in addition, at our pond or around our complex, another 40. And then within 5 miles of home, over 200. So we really do live in a birdie area. And you wouldn't believe how long it took me to get a picture of a chickadee sitting on my chickadee ornament. So speaking of chickadees, my plan is I'm going to go through birds in family groupings, birds that are related. And so we'll start with the chickadee, a year-round resident. On most of them, I put what they prefer to eat, but don't worry about that because in your handout, I'm going to have some graphics and more information on that. In chickadees, you've probably noticed their dining style is grab and go, dine and dash, and they're often stashing seeds. I mean, they can stash up to 1,000 seeds a day or 80,000 a season, and they remember where they are. I can't remember where my car keys are. So next time somebody calls you a bird brain, just turn and smile and say thank you for the compliment. And some people may not know that chickadees are actually cavity nesters. They will find a woodpecker hole, for example, and line it with some material and nest in there. I think chickadees are the perfect spark bird to get children interested and hooked on birding. Because I mean, they'll eat out of your hand and they're really cute. And speaking of cute, the other related bird is a tufted titmouse. Now, this was not taken in my backyard, but I'm including it because I did have a tufted titmouse come to my feeders once, and I was so gobsmacked, I just froze and looked at it, and it was gone. I never got a picture. So I took this one last fall near Cambridge. But we're right on the northern end of their range, but they seem to be becoming more and more common. I know there's some on the RBG properties. I know there's some in the Dundas Valley, and I have seen them at LaSalle in the past. So if you're trying to get someone interested in birding, how can you not smile and feel good about life when you look at that titmouse? So the next family are the nuthatches, and they're so named for the fact that they hack or hatch open seeds. They're both, we have two species, they're both year-round residents. The bigger of the two is this white-breasted nuthatch, very classic pose, sort of almost upside down with their head down. And you can see he's taking a peanut from the seed cylinder. But just a word of caution, don't be giving birds peanuts that were meant for human consumption because the salt is not good for them. You hear them all the time. They're even more nasal than me. You'll hear the beep beep or yank yank call of both species, variations on it. And this note I put here, birdsong references, that's to remind myself that some of the feedback I got on a previous talk was that it would have been really good to play some of the songs as I go because people would like to hear them. And I've experimented and tried, and they just weren't coming through my laptop. Maybe I was doing something wrong. Um, and you know what? It would have added probably too much time to talk anyway. But in your handout, you're going to have links where you can listen to all the birds you want. Nuthatches can be quite feisty. This was there's a pair of rose-breasted grosbeaks and female here, and look at the show this white-breasted nuthatch was putting on. It was having a little conniption, trying to scare them off, but they just ignored it. But so one thing about watching feeders, it's very interesting to watch the sort of dominance rituals playing out, and they literally are establishing the pecking order. And the smaller of the two species is the red-breasted nuthatch. Again, you see him in the head down pose. Here's a pair that you can see that the male's color is just a little more vivid and hers is a little bit muted. The next family I'm going to go through are the corvids. And honestly, ever since the pandemic, I struggle to pronounce that word properly. Family includes blue jays, crows, ravens, all extremely intelligent birds. Blue jays are year-round residents, and yet they do migrate. And I know that sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but it seems like they just all shuffle a bit south. And so what ends up happening is the individual birds you're seeing in the winter may not be the individuals you're seeing in the summer. Just a reminder that water is important year-round. So here's my heated bird bath. And I think everybody knows how raucous and quite frankly, annoying blue jays can be, and they start at a young age. So here's a young one making quite a fuss. And for some reason, I mean, I don't know why, but some birds seem to, molt. All birds molt their feathers once or twice a year, but for some reason, some lose all the feathers on their head at the same time, and they go through this real ugly duckling stage. So here's a blue jay sitting with a Baltimore Oriole, and you can actually see his ear right there. And this cartoon is just perfect. Look, there's a bird photographer. Yeah, right on the day that I molt my friggin' head. Common ravens actually they seem to be becoming more common around here. They're larger than crows, if you're wondering how to tell them apart. Larger, they have a shaggy throat. They have a different vocalization, a deeper gronk, and they tend to be as individuals or a pair, whereas crows, you need a large flock of them flying around. And if you see their tails, ravens have a wedge diamond-shaped tail, while crows are a rounded fan shape. Next family I'm going to go through is the thrush. The one that people will be most familiar with is our robin. Now, most of these migrate, but some are year-round residents. And when they do stick around for the year, they tend to flock up and then rove around looking for fruit and berries. And just this afternoon, somewhere between 25 and 30 robins landed in my in the maples up behind my house. And one came down to my bird bath for a drink. Obviously not feeder birds, but I'm going to show you an exception. Birds are very hardworking. I just found this very entertaining. They're kind of goofy looking when they were carrying nesting materials. Another shot. And then sitting on her nest. And then here's the exception. It's a young one. You can see hasn't molted into the adult plumage yet, but it was partaking in the great jelly that I put out for the Baltimore Orioles. Another thrush is the hermit thrush. These are definitely not feeder birds. I've just happened to have one pass through my yard on migration. They have a very lovely back and tail that's a real rufous, sort of foxy brown color. And some of them do hang around through the winter. They have almost a look-alike relative called the Swainson's thrush. One difference between that and the hermit is the Swainsons have the so-called, like spectacles. And again, we just see them on migration. And there are other really beautiful birds in the family. The wood thrush is the most beautiful song in the world. And Veery, I've never had them in my yard. Eastern bluebirds are actually thrush, and I have had one out back, but no picture. So my next family are the cardinals, and they're close relatives or allies. So here's a shot of 5 males at my feeders and 1 female here. Year-round residents. They make great Christmas cards. Their colors really pop against the snow. I've always liked this shot. I've shown it before. It certainly looks like they're having a bit of a tiff and they're not talking to each other. To my eye, the females are more beautiful than the males. I just love their soft pastel coloring. I think it's really, really pretty. Now, this one, I thought she was having a really bad hair day with this mohawk. But I actually saw her like this for over the span of a couple of months. And you know what? Her partner, look at that look. I mean, he's in love. He looks to be very enamored with it. I should just show you again. One thing about the adults you'll notice is their beaks are bright orange, both sexes. Well, the youngsters have the same plumage as mom or similar, but you see their beaks are black. So they could be males or females. I can't tell, but they're young when you see those black beaks. So here's dad feeding one, and then here's a young male. You can see he's losing that sort of mother-like plumage, and the father-like plumage is growing in. And just like that blue jay, here's a cardinal that's gone through that head molt, and again, there's his ear. One of their relatives or allies is the rose-breasted grosbeak. Now, they are not year-round residents. They come here in the summer to breed. They arrive about May 3rd and depart September 30th. And I'm not some really smart guy that figured out those dates. When you see these dates, I've derived them all from a really good book by our really prominent local birder, Robert Curry, titled Birds of Hamilton and Surrounding Area. Now, I think it may be out of print, unfortunately, but what Bob did was he took all the historic migration data for the area and did statistical analysis on it and came up with these dates, and they are surprisingly accurate, or probably more correct to say the birds are surprisingly consistent. But having said that, the dates are slipping with climate change. This really cracked me up. This is our living room window. That's my barbecue in the back. And this rose-breasted grosbeak landed, and he was turning his head, looking back and forth, like, looking at the menu, have fries, and like he thought it was a drive-through. And a very recurring theme you'll see in a lot of birds: the females don't look like the males at all. They're much more subdued for obvious reasons, sitting on eggs and hiding and protecting young. So here's one in our red bud in the backyard. Probably my best ever, rarest feeder bird was a scarlet tanager. They are not normally a bird that would come to the feeders. If you recall, my opening slide was this bird sitting on my bird bath. And they come to breed in the summer. And scarlet tanagers, like most songbirds, migrate at night. And clearly he must have run out of fuel and gas right at dawn or early morning over my backyard, saw the feeders and dropped down, and he stayed on the feeders all day. It was just an amazing experience. So these are all just taken through the living room window watching him. And this one, you'll see this, this looks maybe funny to you, female type. This is the term ornithologists use when they're not sure, because this is the female plumage, but in the fall, male scarlet tanagers lose their breeding plumage and look very similar. And like the cardinals, the young of either sex tend to look like mom. So you really don't know whether this is an adult female, an adult male in non-breeding plumage, or a juvenile of either sex. But given the first clue is that I took the photo in early August, and the second, it's got this gape with which a lot of young birds, baby birds have for their parents to makes it easier for them to feed them. So I suspect this is a young one that was born that year. Another relative that again is not a normal feeder bird, and this happened last summer. I was so lucky to have an indigo bunting come to the feeders for 2 days, a male. The females are pretty much a solid chocolatey brown. And so for 2 days, we were just blessed with this guy at the yard. And then he left, never to be seen again. Wrens, we have a number of wrens, but the one that's here year round is the Carolina wren. They seem to love to eat everything. This is a very classic wren pose. You see their tails cocked up, and they're often quite round. And they are loud. I like to joke that they must be the loudest animal on the planet per gram of body mass. And it seems like they sing all winter. I heard 2 counter singing this morning, like really loud. And they're hardy, they stay here all winter. So here's one toughing out a snowstorm in the backyard. And then, like all birds, they've got this ability to floof up, and the air that's trapped between their downy feathers warms them up, keeps them warm. It took this shot one winter. This was a January day. It was 20 below zero. And, so they're on the sunny side of the maple in the backyard, cuddled together, staying warm. And another day, you see this sort of notch in the trees here. Another day, one of them climbed in there, you can see it, just to get out of the cold. So that was really cute to see. Here's a pair looking like bookends. Here's one doing a chickadee impersonation. And this was really, really cool to watch. There was a big snowstorm coming, and the seed cylinder was there, and it was pecking away around, and then it climbed right in, and it made himself at home. It was nobody to bug him, and he had it all to himself. And then the snow started, and he hung in, and the snow kept going, and he just stayed in there and sheltered out of the snow and had a great feast. So this is what I love about backyard birding. I mean, it's so entertaining. You never know what you're going to see. Okay, another wren is the house wren. You can see it's blander or more plain than the Carolina wren. And they only come for the summer to breed. They're cavity nesters. They'll use nesting boxes. But I have had them in the backyard. And again, there's that wren tail popped up. And then a third wren is the winter wren, which are uncommon winter and or summer residents. I see them in the winter. I have seen one around our complex. My picture was lousy. So I'm showing you a picture I took at LaSalle in Burlington. And again, really rounded with that lovely tail cocked up. The finch family are a large family, and it's a family that a lot of birders really love. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The most common that everybody would know would be the American goldfinch. They are here year round, though you might not think it, because these are the males with their canary yellow This is a female. And in the fall, through the winter, the males molt into a non-breeding plumage, and they end up looking very much like the females. So you might think they're gone, but they're here. Here's one in our redbud. And here's one eating seeds out of the brown-eyed Susan. And very interesting that their favorite food is things like thistle seeds, which aren't ripe until August. So unlike most songbirds that are breeding in June, July, goldfinch defer their breeding until August when their favorite food is plentiful. Here's one, you can see the redbud is in bloom. So this was just a late snowstorm, but I wanted to include it because I thought his colors really popped against the snow. Quite pretty. So here's a female, close up of a female. And I thought this shot was really cute with the snow on their bills. And I'm calling these female types. People that know more than me could probably tell easily whether these are males or females or young ones. I'm not sure, but my guess is this is a male on the left and a female or a young one on the right. And I'm basing that on the wing bars on this one are bold white and they're colored a little brownish over on this one. So that's just my guess. House finch is a year-round finch, but I don't see them at my feeders in the summer. They only seem to come late fall and in the winter. They actually aren't native to here. Their native range is sort of Western North America, California, down through Mexico. But they were being sold as cage birds in New York City back in the 30s. And when the authorities cracked down on this illicit trade, they just released them out of the cages, and they've propagated across North America and done quite well. So here's one, in the winter. And another one, you can see it's late fall with the leaves. And here's a pair. So again, you see the same theme that the female is quite muted down. And they seem to me to be quite strongly pair bonded, sort of like cardinals. They're often in pairs. And if I see one, I usually see the pair together. Here's one, a female that's partially leucistic, and leucism means she's simply missing some pigments. And it tends to be symmetrical, so she probably has that same white patch on the other cheek as well. Now, all the rest of the finch I'm going to go through are what we call winter finch. So they typically breed further north all the way up into the boreal forests. And then they may or may not come this far south in the winter, particularly if it's what's called an eruption year that's IRR. If they're seed, the pine cones or poor cone crop, they'll come further south looking for food. So this is the purple finch. Some of them may breed around here, but typically further north. And, Roger Torrey Peterson described them as a sparrow dipped in raspberry juice. They really are a beautiful looking bird. Here's a male sitting with a female cardinal in my backyard. And then here's one day I had a whole flock of them, get 4 females and 2 males at the feeders. And finch really like platform feeders. Here's close up of a female. And I find a lot of people struggle sometimes. Is that a house finch or a purple finch? And they're not really sure. But when you see these side-by-side comparisons, it's pretty easy that the purple finch is purple basically all the way down. They may have a little bit of brown streaking, whereas the house finch gives away to brown, and the back and wings are brownish, where it's all purple, all reddish, all around. And the purple finch does have pretty pronounced facial patterns that aren't on the house finch. And if you get a really good look at them, the purple finch's upper bill is straight and it's down curved on a house finch. Pine siskins are a winter finch that I get every winter. Now, some winters I've had up to 50, which gets pretty expensive. This winter I've only had 1 or 2 at a time. And I just think it's because there's not much snow and they don't need to come to feeders. They're quite content with natural food. Here's the pine siskin here sharing seeds from a cone with a goldfinch. And here's one on his own. And then probably one of the favorites for birders are the common redpolls. So here's that word eruption. They really like birch keys, the seeds from birch trees, and they live very high in the Arctic. So when they come here, they've come a long ways south. And 2 or 3 winters ago, we had a major eruption, and I had every day for several months, I had 30 to 50 redpolls. And I so regret not having thought of that stage I set up. I didn't have it at that time. It would have been fantastic. So here's where they're coming from. They live year round in the green, or breeding in the orange. So all the way up the Greenland and Alaska and the high Arctic. And then when they come south, they come into this purple. So you can see they might come down as far as our area down here. Just here's one in the redbud. And they have a very close relative. In fact, so close, I do believe that the experts are lumping hoary redpolls with common redpolls as the same species. I think DNA is showing that they're genetically identical. But hoary named because they have this very frosty hoarfrost look to them. And their face does look different than common redpoll. It kind of looks smushed in a bit. And that winter with all the common redpolls, I was just really lucky to have a hoary in my backyard amongst the flock of commons. And then probably one of the biggest favorites with the birders are the evening grosbeaks. Very large finch. The males are bright yellow. When they're breeding plumage, this beak is actually, the bill is actually greenish. And again, in the fall of 2022, there was an eruption on south. I had 2 dozen in my backyard for a couple of days. It was just amazing. Here's a pair, so you can see the female is quite different. If you go to Algonquin Park, there's lots there right now. Here's a female. So now I'm going to go through. There's tons and tons of sparrows, and I'm just going to go through a few of the more common ones we get around. Song sparrow is probably the most common. A lot of people say, well, they all look the same, just little brown birds. I would encourage you, if you're trying to identify a sparrow, if you're just going to look at one feature, look at their breast, their chest, because you can almost divide them into 2 groups, either a streaky marked breast or a plain breast with no markings, just white. And then, then you can go to your guides, and now you have at least cut the number that you have to go through in half, roughly in half. So song sparrows, there's summer breeders, but some of them, and here's proof of it, do spend the winter. And often every winter, almost every winter, I'll have one in the backyard. Chipping sparrows. Now, see, here's the example. The chipping sparrow, no streaking. Tiny, tiny little sparrows. The white breast, that have a black eye line and this lovely red cap. You'll hear them in the spring around your neighborhood. Their song is a rising trill. Here's one feeding a youngster, and you can see that the youngster does have a streaked breast. They need the camouflage until they're smart enough to evade predators. Dark-eyed juncos are a sparrow that come from further north and often come down here for their winter vacation. So a lot of people call them snowbirds. The males are very pretty with a pinkish beak and the white breast. Females much more muted. And here's one with leucism again, a male with leucism. So it's, and I've seen it in blackbirds, I've seen it in robins quite often. So it's actually fairly common. White-crowned sparrows are a very high north bird that we only see on migration, and they usually go further south than us. So here's where they breed in the orange, from Alaska to Newfoundland. The yellow is where they just migrate through, and the purple is where they're going to. So you can see we're just on the northern edge of where they go for the winter. Quite a large sparrow, beautiful crown. Here's it, from the back of the head, just beautiful markings. A white-throated sparrow is another sparrow that we typically only see in migration, but lots of them spend the winter here. And I've got a few in my backyard every day, every winter. And this gray color, and some of them is actually brown. They can sort of come in 2 flavors or morphs. They're probably best known for their song, which sounds like, oh, Canada, 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 or Sweet Canada. American tree sparrows are like the white crown in that they come from very far in north and they come down here for the winter. Another example, no streaks, but they have a central smudge. And if you have a really keen eye, you'll notice tree sparrows have a bicolored bill, dark on top and yellow in the lower. So here's where they breed in the orange here and they come down to the purple for the winter. So I've had one at my feeders this winter a couple of times, and there's lots of them around. If there's goldenrod or anything that's gone to seed, you'll see them around that. Fox sparrow is probably my favorite sparrow. They're large, chunky. They have these beautiful chevrons or arrows pointing up on their chest. Again, see them on migration, but some of them do over winter here. I've had one in my backyard, didn't get a picture. This was taken at Henry Valley, Royal Botanical Gardens in Burlington. Photobombed by a cardinal. House sparrows, very, very common around here. These are invasive species from Europe, and they're actually not even related to our sparrows. Year-round residents. Males are actually quite pretty. Here's the female in our redbud. Here's one, a female on my stage. And they are cavity nesters, and they will use housing boxes that people put out for bluebirds, and they'll break into houses. So this is the back of our house, and here she is feeding the nestlings in our house. And then when they fledged, here she is feeding them in our backyard. Blackbirds, we have quite a few species. The one that people know the most is the red-winged blackbird. For a lot of the blackbirds, you're going to see their return dates are very early. So often in late February, you hear that conqueree, it's a great harbinger of spring. And some will actually stay the winter. And I had a female at my feeders last week. Here's the female. It's been said that they are the most commonly misidentified bird in North America. Because I think a lot of people think they're a sparrow. So the one I saw was probably an overwintering bird. I don't think it's an early returning migrant. Cowbirds are a blackbird. And again, you see they return pretty early. And again, some of them spend the winter. And again, I've had them at my feeders in the last week or two. Here's the pair. You see the female's quite bland compared to the male. He's almost iridescent here. And cowbirds are nest parasites. They lay an egg in some other bird's nest and then abandon it and leave it for the surrogate parent to raise. Sort of like cuckoos in Europe, hence the term cuckold. And so here's a song sparrow being nagged by her baby and then feeding her baby. And here's a poor little chipping sparrow feeding its baby cowbird. Grackles are another blackbird that come back quite early, and some may stay around the winter. I call them pig birds because they come in big flocks and clean out your feeders. The males are quite pretty, but they always look pretty grumpy. If you're looking for an angry bird, I rest my case. And here's my third example of a bird that's gone through an ugly molt, and again, there's its ear opening. And here's an adult feeding a young. And here's a youngster. There's that gape I was talking about earlier. The prettiest of the blackbirds is the Baltimore Oriole. They come about May 3rd, leave about September 8th. They love oranges, grape jelly. They'll take nectar from flowers, and you'll see in a minute, they try to get hummingbird nectar out of the feeder. Those my age might remember creamsicles. I like to say they look like a creamsicle with wings. Just a lovely bird. Here's the female with her partner. Here's the female in the redbud. And you can see, I keep saying, we talk about the redbud. It shows the value of having a tree for them to sit at close to the feeders, but not too close. Here's dad feeding a youngster. And here's a young one with grape jelly literally on the tip of its tongue. You can see its tongue there. And here's one, trying to do a hummingbird impersonation. And here's one trying to get nectar from the hostas. Now, this is a really cool experience from a few years ago. First off, here's a pair of cardinals having an intimate moment, sharing a seed. But you'll see there's 3 male Baltimore Orioles, and you see this one looks different. Well, this is a close relative called an orchard oriole. They're not as common as the Baltimore Orioles. They're a little bit smaller, and they don't seem to get along very well. I watched some epic battles between the two. But I think they're absolutely beautiful birds. And I hadn't realized, I just read that they are probably the earliest southbound of all our songbirds. As soon as the kids have fledged, apparently they turn around and head south. So by late June, early July, they're already gone. I've never observed that, but I just think they're a beautiful bird and probably not that common at feeders. Here's the female. And here's a young male, and you can see the molt into adult plumage. And then finally, a rusty blackbird. You wouldn't think of as a feeder bird, and they're not that common. We see them on migration. Some are around during the winter. And in the last week of November, this one hung around my yard for a whole week and never got up on the feeders, but it ate seed off the ground for the whole week. And I must admit, I get kind of cross-eyed looking at these googly eyes. Very, very neat looking birds. So the next family is called Mimidae or mimics. And so these are birds like a mockingbird, brown thrasher, and catbird. And catbird's well named because they do make one call that sounds like a cat meowing. And you wouldn't think of them normally as feeder birds, but I've had them in a couple of summers. They've discovered they like grape jelly. They have a lovely soft gray color with a black cap and rufous brownish underparts. So here's the pair of them at the feeders. Okay, next up is a creeper, little brown creeper. These are the tiniest little birds. They're probably not much bigger than a hummingbird, or about the same size. And they fly to the base of a tree, and then they literally run up it and circling it, probing under the bark with their long curved bill for insects. I usually see them in the winter, and very hard for me to get a picture of because they're just always on the move. They don't sit still very long. And here's a profile so you can see the long curved bill. So they're certainly not feeder birds. They're looking for insects. Starlings are an invasive bird from England, Europe. They were introduced in 1890. Some genius wanted all the birds of Shakespeare, and they released, I think it was 60 starlings in Central Park, and the rest is history. They've done very well. And if they weren't invasive and in my pig bird category for cleaning out the feeders, we'd probably be in awe because they're very pretty. They got this iridescent purple green, and in their winter plumage with these sort of white stars or arrows are really pretty. But man, I've got dozens of my feeders every day. Here's their young, and these guys look like they haven't had a meal in a while because they're very grumpy looking. Cedar waxwings, in my view, are our most elegant bird. They look like they're wearing a tuxedo. They're not a feeder bird. They're here year round. They really like, crab apples, fruit, berries, very gregarious. If you see one, you're probably going to see 10, 12, 100. They're roving flocks going around looking for fruit. And just like the goldfinch, because their favorite food is fruit, they defer their breeding until later in the summer when the berries are ripe. So a couple shots in my backyard. So now I'm going to go through some birds that are definitely not feeder birds because they're primarily insect eaters, but that I've seen either in my backyard or around our complex. So kinglets, very tiny. We have 2 species. The golden crowned is one that may spend the winter. These guys are very tiny, smaller than a chickadee, and they are perpetual motion machines, always on the go catching insects. And the other one is the ruby-crowned kinglet. I read once a great line that trying to get a picture of one is like trying to shoot popcorn because they're just zing, 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 zing all over. The vireos is a nice family of beautiful birds that are insect eaters. I know one of my mentors is online here, and he's the one that got me hooked on vireos. Again, not feeder birds because they're insect eaters. This is a warbling vireo that perched briefly in the backyard. This is the red-eyed vireo. This is not from my backyard because these birds are typically quite high up in the canopy. They sing, they're incessant singers, nonstop. Unlike most birds, they sing from dawn till dusk, all day, every day, from spring till fall, from the treetops. This was in an area during spring migration, so he was down low, and he didn't care I was there. I got a picture of him, and you can see the red eye. And then the blue-headed vireo is my favorite of the bunch. I love these big spectacles they have, and that was by our pond. And then, we have lots of flycatchers. Most of them are quite bland and hard to identify, to be honest. The most common one, and one maybe people are most familiar with, is the phoebe, and they're named for their call because there's you hear phoebe, 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 and if you watch, they're pumping their tail all the time. Tail's going up and down. They really like our pond because they hawk flies over the pond. A very noisy flycatcher and much larger and colorful is the great crested flycatcher. This is one, when you get the links in the handout, I encourage you to look up their song because it sounds like a very loud reap, reap. And there's a pair of them landed in our maple in the backyard. Just beautiful lemon yellow, quite large, noisy birds. Those who know me well know that I am absolute warbler lover. My favorite family of birds. They're small, they're beautiful. A huge family, 30, 35 species in Ontario. I'm just going to go through a few, don't panic. So just a few that I've seen around the neighborhood. This was at our pond, a pine warbler. And again, the warblers are primarily insect eaters. There are a few exceptions, and pine warblers actually will take suet. Yellow warbler, the males have these beautiful tiger stripes. This was at our pond. So they come and breed. American redstarts, lots of them breed in the Dundas Valley. Magnolia warblers are ones that we only see in migration. They go further north to the boreal forests. This was at our pond, but just beautiful markings. Another one that goes up north to breed, but we see in migration is the yellow rump warbler. Now, this is one of the exceptions. They can actually process and digest some berries. So yellow rump warblers are often the last ones to leave in the fall because they'll linger around and eat berries when the bugs are all gone. Doves or mourning doves, you might be forgiven to think they're named for like good morning because they start cooing quite early, but the morning is with the U, it's because it sounds quite sad. Here's a couple of lovey-doveys. Here's one that is sunbathing. And just to reiterate that how important water is, and that you have this floofing mechanism to stay warm. And then our hummingbirds, they come and breed in the summer. They're very hardy when you see that these little tiny things hang on into October before they head south. Only the males have the beautiful red throat, and depending on the light, they can kind of turn it on and off. It can look just brown or black or red. Here's a female without the throat, and she's sunbathing. She just laid down on the garden wall there. Now we're a bit deprived here because there's actually 350 species of hummingbirds, and they're all in the Americas. There's no hummingbirds in Eurasia, and yet we only get one. So if you really love hummingbirds, I think Ecuador is probably the prime place to go, but Arizona and the Southwest U.S., you can probably get 15 or 20 species. Woodpeckers, we have quite a few species, and most of them are here year-round. Our most common is the downy woodpecker. Just going to point out now, because I'll come back to it, they have a very tiny little chisel-like bill, and the males have a red cap at the back of their head. The females lack that cap. And here's one that discovered grape jelly. You know, I think I'm getting all my birds addicted to junk food. Now here's the look-alike to the downy is the hairy woodpecker. And you see its bill is almost as long as the width of its head, and it's much larger. Here's the male with the red cap, the female without the cap. You know, here's a female dining with a Carolina wren. I really like seeing two different species eating together. It just always looks kind of neat. And you know, we talked about dominance rituals. This was pretty interesting. If you watch, I watched this female hairy stood her ground from this blue jay that was being annoying, and look who won. You know, and she stared him down, and he backed off. And this again, this is the kind of entertainment that I get out of backyard birding. That beats Netflix any day. So side by side comparisons for identifying birds doesn't really work because how often do you get to see them side by side? But every now and then you get lucky. So here's the female downy on the left and the hairy on the right. So you can see just how much bigger the hairies are. You can see how much bigger the bill is. And then if you get a good look at them, the downy has little black tail spots and the hairies don't have any. The outer feathers are solid white. Another woodpecker that's here year round is the red-bellied woodpecker. They seem to be becoming very common. I have lots of them come to the feeder. They hardly have a smidge of red on their belly, but there was already a woodpecker named red-headed woodpecker, which is the obvious name for them. The males have the red comes right over their crown and right down to their bill. Whereas the females, it stops at the back of their head, maybe with a little bit of coloring down here, but not over the front of their head. Pileated woodpecker is our biggest woodpecker. They're about the size of a crow. They love carpenter ants, so you see them doing some serious excavation work on trees. This was taken along the entrance into our complex. And they're easy to tell males from females. This is a female. Her so-called mustache here is black, and the males, it's red, like the crown. Now, the northern flicker is a woodpecker that migrates. I mean, a few might spend the winter, but primarily they migrate. And why is that? It's because their favorite food is ants. So once the ground is frozen, they can't access them. And that's why you often see them on the ground. You know, they hop through the backyard poking, looking for anthills. And the males have this black mustache. They have beautiful polka dot markings. They're very pretty. The black mustache. The females lack the mustache. I really like this shot. It was early morning. The pair of them were soaking up the rising sun as the just past full moon is setting behind them. And here's a young one that took up my wicker rocking chair in the backyard. And then we have a yellow-bellied sapsucker. And these guys mostly seen on migration, but some of them will cling around. And I had some coming to my feeders for 2 winters. They look to me quite portly, like they have a beer barrel or beer belly chest. The males have a red throat, and the females lack it. Turkeys. I've had up to 18 turkeys in our tiny little backyard. Not normally a feeder bird, but I call them the cleanup crew. They were essentially extinct, which extirpated in Ontario and reintroduced in 1984, and have become so prevalent that there's now a hunting season. Probably a face only a mother could love. I thought this shot was great because he's putting on his best performance and she just doesn't look interested at all. She's looking right past him. This was great. If you can see the chipmunk here, I put seed down in the ground and these two ate together, you know, nose to nose. The chippy wasn't bothered by the turkey at all. And then when I looked out one day and I saw this one laying down, I thought, okay, you guys, you're making yourself at home, getting too comfortable in Bob's backyard. They're moving right in. And our cat Loshik, he loves to watch the birds with me through the windows only. But he's not used to seeing birds bigger than himself. And when this was the first time we'd ever had turkeys in the yard, he was looking at them. And then he turned and he gave me this look like, what the, did you see that? So one thing you got to be aware of is if you like feeding the birds, you're probably going to attract raptors, hawks, because they want to eat your feeder birds. And I don't know if there's much you can do about it. If you get an annoying hawk that's just hanging out day after day after day, I think the only thing you do is take your feeders in for a couple of days till he gets bored and moves on. And when I first wrote this up, I started with the red-tailed hawk, just because I've seen pictures of it or seen it and taken pictures in the backyard. But when I first wrote this up, I was thinking, they don't attack feeders. You see them on poles on the side of the highway. I've never seen one go after my feeders. Well, since I wrote this, one came rocketing into that spruce tree in our backyard. And after something, it came up empty-handed, but it sure was attacking one of my feeder birds. But the hawk that's more apt to stalk your feeders is the Cooper's hawk. They have a different wing and tail pattern that makes them more aerodynamic. They're more like fighter jets. And so, these guys are better at, I watched one pick a mourning dove right out of the air. So it's one of their favorite foods is mourning dove. And so I get these guys coming by my feeders quite frequently. This was after a big thunderstorm that rolled through and it cleared off rapidly. And I'm pretty sure he was just drying out. So now just like the hairy and the downy woodpeckers, the Cooper's has a look-alike that's much smaller called the sharp-shinned hawk. And again, size comparisons are tough because you're not going to see them sitting next to each other. And I apologize, this slide's pretty messy, but here's the Coopers on the left and the sharp-shinned on the right. And the biggest difference is size, which is hard to tell, like I say, because the Coopers is about the size of a crow, whereas the sharp-shinned's more like a blue jay to a dove. But given that you're probably only going to see one at a time, two things you can key on is the gray feathers on their head. On the Coopers, it basically stops at the back of their head, at their neck. So it gives them a capped appearance. Whereas on a Sharpie, it goes right down their neck. So it looks like they have a hood. And then secondly, more or less rule of thumb, the tip of the tail, when you see them perched on a Cooper's is rounded and a Sharpie's is squared off. So I always remember Cooper's curved, Sharpie square.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Just to interject, sorry to interrupt. I am literally so wrapped in attention, I hardly noticed myself. But it is 8:15. I would say keep going. I feel like everybody is super into this presentation, but I just want to acknowledge if anybody does need to sign out, that it is being recorded and you will not miss the remainder of the presentation. And everybody who signed up will get the meeting link. So please continue, Bob. And just if anybody does need to head out, you will get the recording link so you won't miss any of the rest of this awesome presentation.
I apologize, everybody. I had so many birds I wanted to show off. And honestly, this is like the 10th iteration and I've cut out about half the birds. So actually, I'm almost done the formal part of the presentation.
And I would say, Bob, we're all here to listen. So do not apologize. We are thanking you for all of this. And just continue on your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. You're very kind. So having a pond introduces a whole new realm of bird life. We've had mallards nesting at the pond. We've had a bunch of different duck species. For example, here's a pair of blue-winged teal. We've had great egret, the big white egrets. We've had great blue herons. I haven't had pictures of either. And this green heron, it's a young one, hung around the pond last summer for about a week. And then we get shorebirds, wading birds like a killdeer. And solitary sandpiper and a spotted sandpiper, which I think are just gorgeous. So, just before I end this bit about this part of the formal talk, I want to say one last thing about birds. That birding is a hobby that really makes you feel good to be alive. It really makes you live in the moment and appreciate that, you're sharing this planet and your time with these creatures that are so adaptable and so smart and work so hard. And it gets your mind off your worries. It gets my mind off my aches and pains. And what I really like about it is that birding is what I would call the gateway drug to environmental awareness. It teaches us to value and care for birds. And if you care for birds, you care about their lives, about their habitat, the environment, the climate change. So it's just, the more you get into birding, the more you appreciate that, we've got to smarten up and look after our planet. So that's a little bit of a segue. I just want to touch on this for a minute. I'm very into bird advocacy. And I was a member of a great organization called Bird Friendly City, Hamilton, Burlington. And this is a Nature Canada initiative trying to push cities into becoming more bird friendly, make their lives easier. And my duty when I was a member was public outreach and education. And Burlington Green is a member. And that's how these talks actually began. Is I was doing this for Burlington. Well, Burlington Green and I were doing it together on behalf of that team. And just like Cale ran that poll at the beginning, one of the processes we had to run under our Nature Canada mandate was to name a city bird. And so Burlington chose the trumpeter swan and Hamilton the peregrine falcon. And Nature Canada, we were successful. They certified both cities as bird friendly. But renewal is up on this and work continues and more work remains to be done. And I'm now co-chair of a new independent bird advocacy group focused solely on Hamilton. We call ourselves Birdsong Hamilton. We're working with local councillors to promote bird-friendly measures. And those issues are things like lights out during migration, window treatments to prevent window collisions, bird-friendly building standards, roaming cats. And I'm going to be touching on some of those when I get into the Q&A portion in a minute. So just to conclude this portion, for me, birding helps me cope with chronic pain and illness. And the last couple of lines I wrote in my book is, life is a journey and it is incumbent on us to make the best of it. I hope my journey might inspire some folks suffering with a chronic illness to get out of the limelight and into the sunlight, where the singing birds will warm your heart and lift your spirits. So thank you, everybody. And for those that have had enough of me, feel free to sign off. And those that want to keep going, I believe it'll take about another 15 minutes or so to go through the answers I prepared for the questions that were submitted. And I probably won't take any questions live tonight, Cale, given the time, but Cale will send them to me and I'll address them all in a handout. So without further ado, then I'll just keep going right into the questions. And one of the common themes in the questions, how to attract birds in terms of planting and landscaping. So I thought this cartoon was a great way to start. It's called habitat. Yes, it's messy, but it's called habitat. If you have a feeder sitting out on a sea of green of manicured grass, and 20 feet or 40 feet from the nearest tree, the birds aren't going to be impressed. So don't expect that you're going to attract a lot of them. Now, in terms of actually the planting landscaping, that's the subject of a whole other talk. And I am no expert on that, but I am going to point you to a couple of really excellent websites. And Birds Canada is our federal agency. They're based at Port Rowan down in Lake Erie. And this is a screenshot from their website. And they give you all the knowledge you need to do to make a pollinator garden and a bird-friendly garden. You even pick the right ecozone that you're in for what plants are going to work the most. And the second thing you can do is leave the leaves. They don't need to be raked up in the fall. Wait till spring and take them out in the spring. You are just raking up a bazillion dead insects and chrysalises and cocoons and eggs, bird food. And you're removing, that's nutrients that are going to go into the soil. So leave the leaves. And I'm going to send a lot of information on that as well. So back to this shot again. We've already seen this, and I won't go over it again. One of the questions was that someone had a Baltimore Oriole come in and land in the spring, gone, never to be seen again. So how do I capture that flyover? Well, I suggest one thing, and these dates are from, again, from Bob Curry's book. Let's face it, as a bird feeder, you probably have a lot of competition from neighbors. Lots of people feed birds now. So ideally, orioles return and the grosbeaks return about May 3rd. The hummingbirds, I can't see the date, sorry, I think it was May 7th. It's underneath the toolbar. I strongly suggest you put your feed out for these guys for 5 days before that. That's the median return date. So if you happen to get lucky and put your Oriole feeder out, say the last day of April, maybe a Baltimore Orioles say, hey, and they'll stay, and maybe you get lucky and they'll nest in your yard. So that's my answer to that is try to be the first out with the food. Lots of questions about squirrel proofing. You can buy squirrel buster feeders. I won't get into that. And I already mentioned the baffle to keep them from climbing up. And I touched on briefly that you want to be at least 10 feet away from the nearest trees. I do have one squirrel, and I call him Squirrel de Soleil because I got to give him credit. He gets out to the edge of this bush here, and he's the only squirrel. He can leap. He clings by his tippy toes and climbs up on the platform. And when he does it, I just kind of go, hats off, buddy, you deserve it. The other squirrels go out and look, and not for me. So anyway, try to stay 10 feet away if you can. And then there are lots of questions about favorite feeders. So I'll quickly go through, in this photo, you can see a suet feeder, you can see a Niger tube, I've got this tray platform feeder, and I've got a seed cylinder. So the platform feeders, I mentioned the finch really liked them. When I knew it was an eruption year, I went and bought this larger tray and I built it and they came. I got really lucky and got all these grosbeaks. It doesn't really show in the previous photos, but I got this long landing arm. And I find that really useful because here's a chipping sparrow on it. So the smaller birds, if they're being bullied off by the blue jays or whatever, they'll sit on here and wait a turn to sneak in and grab a bite. The seed cylinders, I find everybody loves them. From the Carolina wrens, as you saw, the nuthatches, the blue jays, everybody eats from the seed cylinders. You can buy these tiny feeders called clingers only. So the smaller birds can land, cling, and eat. But I've watched blue jays literally burn more calories flapping away trying to land, and then they give up. So I like those. The specialty feeders like a Niger tube. By the way, this was taken in March. You can see the goldfinch, they're molting back into male adult plumage. You can see the blacks coming in. I've got a peanut tray, but I've also got this little roof. And you can adjust the roof, obviously. You can adjust how high you want to make it. So if you want just a little Carolina wren or a nuthatch to get in and not a big dove or, not a dove, but say a blue jay, you can put it nice and tight. He feels snug in there, not being harassed by anybody. The suet feeders, I really like the ones with a long paddle and with the idea that the larger woodpeckers can brace themselves against it. Little downies are quite happy just up here on the cage, but you get a great big one. And I keep hoping for pileated woodpecker. I've watched them fly right by, but I haven't had any luck having them land yet. And you can actually buy upside down suet feeders. So, it keeps the suet dry from any weather. And, the woodpeckers, here's the female, you can see the red stuffs, keeps them secure. Don't have to worry about raptors going over. I already mentioned this specialty feeder for Baltimore Orioles. You spike an orange here. There's little troughs for grape jelly. And then the hummingbird feeder, I really encourage you not to buy colored nectar that stores sell. That's just food dye. You don't need that. The color of the feeder attracts them, and you make your own nectar, 4 parts water, 1 part sugar, and that'll be in your handout. Should I offer water in the winter? Yes. Birds need to drink and bathe even in the coldest weather. This was taken a couple of weeks ago when we still had snow. And I got my heater here. Looks like a rock. So they stand on it. Best protocol for keeping things clean and by being selfish given the risk of avian flu. Well, yes, you've got to scrub your feeders regularly with soap and water. If you see any mold, you want to use maybe a 10% bleach solution. The hummingbird feeders in particular need to be cleaned very often in the summer. If it's hot and muggy, the sugar water is going to go off. Now, as for avian flu, it primarily affects communal birds that are really living in close proximity. So that's why it's really hard on domestic poultry, chickens, geese, and waterfowl that all live close together. As far as I know, it hasn't had a big impact on songbirds. But obviously, if you do see sick birds, you should use bleach solution, clean your feeders, bring them in for a while. And do the same if you see eye disease in house finch, which is fairly common and can spread at the feeders. It's quite gross looking. You'll see the sort of a crusted over eye on a house finch. I have a full station of feeders this winter. I had very few birds. What's going on? Well, Gail, I don't know when this question was submitted, but my guess is it was one of the early first questions when registration just opened and we had no snow. I had the very same. It was a mild start to winter, no snow cover, so nothing was preventing the birds from foraging for natural food. Even your regular feeder birds don't take more than 50% of their diet from your feeders. They're doing a risk assessment all the time. Do I cross that open space and go into the open to eat? Or do I just stay here where I can get food on the ground under a tree and I'm safer? Last year we had 4 pairs of cardinals, but we haven't got them this year. What can we do? How to draw more birds? Here's safflower seeds, black oil, sunflower seeds, cardinals love. Don't worry about this. I'm sending this in the handout, graphic, species of birds and what their preferred food is. And actually a couple of articles on it as well. And I would encourage, like, for those living right in Burlington, Wild Birds Unlimited staff is extremely knowledgeable. You go in and talk to them. Specialty stores, Urban Nature, all across the GTA. Go in and talk to the staff there. Up in Sudbury, I know there's the Backyard Birder, and I'm sure other towns and places have specialty stores. What causes blue jays to swarm? A few years ago, I had over 50 on the lawn. And again, there was no mention of time of year that this was witnessed, but I bet any money it was on migration. Having said songbirds mostly migrate at night, blue jays migrate in the daytime in big flocks. And I've witnessed the same thing. And when I lived in Oakville, I had like 25 of them. It's just a sea of blue going around and around. So I suspect this was just a migrating flock. Someone asked, "Did Canada geese be hunted in Canada?" Yes. You obviously need a hunting license and a gun license, but yes. A concern about how expensive seed has become, and it certainly has skyrocketed in price. Inflation's hurting us all, but the war in Ukraine has certainly impacted the supply chain. But one idea I have is that, when you buy seed, you're paying by the pound. So when you buy sunflower seeds, half of what you paid for is on the ground, causing a mess, attracting rodents, and killing your grass and not eaten. Whereas wild birds has what they call their no mess seed. So it's chipped, already shelled sunflower seed, and you get a blend as well. It's 100% consumed. It's more expensive, but is it really, when you think about it, that it's all eaten? And the other thought I did have was, well, maybe you pool your resources with your neighbors or friends and buy your seed in bulk. You could go to a place like Bogle's up in Flamborough and buy in bulk. But that's tricky because if you don't store your seed in airtight containers, especially if it's been shelled, it could get either too dry and desiccated or too wet and moldy. And you might end up with moths in the container. And if you open the container inside, then you can end up with a moth problem in your house. Now, the moths aren't a problem for the birds. It's just protein. But, in fact, Wild Birds told me they used to sell 50-pound seed bags and they don't anymore because it's just too big. And if people don't go through it in time, the seed can go off. So just be very careful about buying in bulk. And there's lots of concern about droppings attracting rats and squirrels. So if you're offering mixed seed, you essentially have 2 or more feeders going at once, if that makes any sense. Because there's lots of birds like blue jays that want to sort through and pick out their favorites. And they're flicking and tossing the seeds they don't want to eat. And those seeds go on the ground. Now, yes, some of the sparrows will clean them up, but you want to reduce that flicking and tossing. So one thing you can do is use a big tray feeder like I have, because there's less spillage over the sides. Even if they flick it, it may still stay on the tray. Suggesting is use a specific feeder for each type of seed. The bird that wants that seed is going to go to it. If they don't like it, they're not going to go to it. So they're not going to be flicking it away. Use the no-mess seeds I just talked about, or you can buy trays to go under your feeder, like here. And you want to clean under your feeders frequently, but obviously that's hard to do when there's snow. Or, I kind of joke, but get a flock of turkeys like I do. They're a cleanup crew. But there's a downside to that because then they leave you some some offerings that aren't so nice. If you do have a rat problem, I understand that you can buy poison bait boxes, but think of the unintended consequences. You don't want to be poisoning chipmunks or squirrels, or if the raptors eat a poison critter, it gets into the food chain. So I have never had the problem. I am no expert, but I'd suggest you go to the experts and ask them as a starting point, and maybe then you need pest control. What to do about pigeons and doves? There are pigeon guards, like little bars you can put on your hot feeders, or you can buy these like cages that can go around your feeders. So the smaller birds can fly in, but the doves and the grackles and you can keep them out. Favorite books for ID? Well, look at the title, Feed the Birds. This is, I think, the newest one from Chris Early. He's the naturalist at the Guelph Arboretum, and Chris was kind enough to read an advance copy of my book and write a lovely blurb at the front of it. And furthermore, for apps, Cornell's app called Merlin. Please download that. It's a free app. You download it to your phone. It's got 3 ways of identifying birds. Photo ID, you take a picture, you load it in, it churns away, it comes back with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 suggestions. Statistically, they found their first suggestions 90-95% accurate. Second is a step-by-step ID where maybe you didn't get a picture and it walks you. Was it bigger than a sparrow? Was it smaller than a blue jay? And it walks you through. Did it have a long tail? And it narrows you right down and helps you identify. And then the third is Sound ID. This is fairly new in it the last couple of years. It is a game changer for me because I'm going deaf. It's like Shazam for birds. You just hit record and you start seeing sonograms and all the birds that are singing. So you can start learning their song very quickly. So Merlin, I highly recommend. And then I have basically a bird field guide that I bought called iBird Pro. When I got it was like $25. It's like having a full guide on your phone rather than towed around a book. But I believe it's only a subscription service now. And though nobody asked, I just want to touch on this very quickly because window inclusions are very important to me in my bird advocacy. About 1 billion birds a year in North America are killed colliding with windows, buildings, primarily glass. And surprisingly, most of these collisions are in daylight and in the first 3 stories. It's not way up high. So one thing you do is you get window treatments so the birds realize it's an obstacle they can't fly through. You put these patterns on your window, you see right through them. They become oblivious to you. I think the standard now is maximum 2 inch by 2 inch, and the birds know they can't get through that. But if you don't have window treatments, this may be counterintuitive, but you're better to have your feeders closer to your house. Because then the birds, if they're startled by a raptor, don't have room to get up a big head of steam, and they're less likely to break their neck when they hit your window. And you might say, well, I don't get any collisions anyway. Well, first off, how do you know for sure? Pardon me, you might not be home to hear it. And apparently, there's studies have been done that even rigorous programs of looking for dead birds, they figured they only find about 30%. And why is that? Because wounded birds often, just on adrenaline, they fly away and die somewhere else. And often the carcasses are scavenged very quickly. And my, pardon the pun, pet peeve is roaming cats. Roaming cats in North America kill more birds than building collisions, power lines, wind turbines. Almost 2.5 billion birds in the US every year, 200 million in Canada, and even more small mammals. Cats are introduced. Our wildlife did not evolve to be wary of cats. And it's even worse this time of year because we've got all these ground feeding sparrows like the juncos that are really vulnerable. Now, both Hamilton and Burlington have bylaws. Those cats aren't supposed to roam off your property, but those bylaws aren't enforced, so it seems. But, The indoor cat's average lifespan is 14 years. Outdoors, it's only 2 to 5. So, think about that. But even more scary is a study in the US showed that the average urban coyote's diet is 20% cat. So please keep your cat inside for the sake of your cat and for our birds. So that's it for the questions. Like I say, the handout is going to have a ton of information. It may take me a day or two to prepare it. I'll send it to Cale and he'll distribute it to all the registrants. So it looks like we lost maybe half the crowd. Thank you all for hanging in, and I really appreciate your time. Cale, that's it. I'll stop screen sharing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bob. And I just put a little note in the chat that I will be as concise as I can with my follow-up. But just wanted to share before I do any of that, just there's so many nice comments in the chat, and I let everybody know that we will be sharing a copy of the chat with you so that you'll have your a good time to actually go through it and not have to rush through and see lots of the lovely comments in here. But just on behalf of everyone, I think I can say that I always learn so much. I am like dizzied and excited and exhilarated, I would say, with information. But I'm sure everybody feels wonderful things. So I will just cover the few things, and maybe while we have still a few people here, I'll just throw up one poll and we'll include it. Maybe we'll figure out a way, but we just wanted to see some future topics that some of you might be interested in. And we had a few options here. And then just there's a space there if anybody has any burning ideas or thoughts or subjects that they wanted Bob to cover. And again, we'll share these sort of results with Bob, and it'll help us determine what our next webinars are, because I think I can just say this was a tremendous success. We're so happy that you joined us, and I'll leave that poll up for just a second more, and I will start to share the screen and just share the few updates that I still have before calling it a night officially. And again, just a reminder that this is part of the recording, so if you do have to head out, you are not missing anything. So just wanted to cover a few of the upcoming opportunities coming up that many of you are likely already aware of. So Burlington Green, as usual, I believe this is our 16th year, is hosting the citywide cleanup for the city of Burlington. We're going to be launching that most likely around March break, so stay tuned for that. But as usual, anyone who lives, works, and plays in Burlington is able to sign up for a cleanup. You just pick your location, you pick which of the supply depots you want to pick up your free cleanup supplies if you need them, and then you join the citywide effort to clean up our beautiful cities. So especially like we just talked about, the health of birds and the health of wildlife, and picking up litter, especially the small pieces of plastic, and the big pieces are obviously very important, but especially the small pieces can be especially hazardous to wildlife, specifically birds, who can eat them and mistake them for different types of food, and they are not food. So look out for that. We're excited, in school groups, businesses, community groups, church groups, whatever you got, you and some friends, you and yourself, we encourage everybody to participate in that. Our youth network, I won't say very much on it other than you can check out that page on our website. It is for ages 14 to 24, and we just basically try and help connect young people with opportunities to help the environment, and of course with each other, so that they can all be friends and we can build community, and addressing eco issues can be less overwhelming if we do it together. The second last thing is the Monarch Butterfly Eclipse Project. So there is a wonderful group of young students from Oakville who are selling some eclipse glasses. So it's not really safe to look at the eclipse with your bare eyes. It's happening on April 8th. And there is a wonderful viewing opportunity that will take place on Burlington Beach. So you can stay tuned for more information about that. But basically, the synopsis of it is that what does an eclipse have to do with monarch butterflies? Basically, the path that the eclipse is taking across North America is almost identical to the path that the monarch butterflies take in their migration route. So it's a wonderful coincidence, and the girls who are organizing this are doing a fundraiser, so you can buy the glasses, the eclipse glasses. And all of the money that they raise goes to supporting monarch butterflies. And if you buy the glasses through the link on our website, and I'm sure we'll put the link in our post-meeting stuff, 20% of the profits go to Burlington Green. So thank you in advance for anybody who wants to purchase those glasses and come out and check out the eclipse with us on April 8th. And then also just we have 2 creative workshops coming up at the Art Gallery that are sort of themed and specifically marketed towards older adults. However, anyone is welcome, and that's on the February 29th and March 8th. And I believe it's like a clay workshop and something else that's creative in its nature, but that will be also on our website and our social media. And of course, we always are looking for volunteers. We have volunteer opportunities for individuals, for work teams, community groups, such as guided beach cleanups with microplastic education. And Shelby will post the link to our volunteer page just in our chat. And then the last things I promise is our thank you survey. Our survey. We just would really appreciate your feedback. Anyone who has some moments to share, we will be looking for feedback. We look for feedback at all of our events to try and make them as best as we can. Shelby's going to pop the link to that in the chat. We, of course, like Bob said, are always open to and super, super grateful for any donations that support our charitable work. And the last thing, like Shelby said, is just to volunteer with us. So thank you to our sponsors, Mapleview Mall and the City of Burlington, for helping us to put together this event tonight and offering it to all of you for free. We are very grateful for them supporting our nature-friendly Burlington program. And just a final thank you to all of you who are still here watching at the end, and anybody who might have watched this on YouTube anytime in the future. But to you, it's just the present. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us this evening and any evening you happen to be tuned in. And a final thank you, round of applause for Bob. We are so grateful for your time, and stay tuned, everyone, for that those follow-up resources. And you can go ahead and stop the recording at any time, Shelby.